In this video, we are going to talk about how to integrate AWS's Secret Manager with Jenkins. If you've ever managed multiple Jenkins controllers at the same time, there's a pretty good chance that you also needed to manage the same credential across all of those controllers. In the past, you may have created scripts to manage those credentials for you, but now you're starting to think a centralized credentials management tool would better serve you. In this video, we're going to be using AWS's Secret Manager to act as our centralized credentials management store. Here's today's starting point. I have a Jenkins LTS controller version 2.289.2. When it was installed using install suggested plugins. We also have an agent, but it hasn't been connected to the controller yet. And finally, I have an AWS account set up. There is a link to a gist that has all of the commands and the documentation for what we're going to be going over today down in the description. Now, first off, as I said, when we installed the Jenkins controller, we did install suggested plugins. Now, you could write your own way of integrating with AWS Secrets Manager, but there is a plugin for that, and that's what we're going to be using today. So to start with, let's go ahead and install that plugin. So let's go to Manage Jenkins, Manage Plugins, go to Available, and let's search for AWS-Secrets. And what will happen is you'll see AWS Secrets Manager Credentials Provider. At the time of recording, the version is 0.5.3. Let's check the box and then click on Download Now and Install After Restart. And you will see here that we're downloading not only the credentials provider, but also the AWS SDK, which is a dependency for the credentials provider. And let's verify that the plugin was installed. We'll go to Manage Plugins, and we will go to Installed. And let's type AWS. We can see that our SDK is there, and let's just dash Secrets, and we can see Secrets Manager is there as well. Now let's go take a quick look at the documentation for the Secrets Credentials Provider plugin. So what we can see here is we have AWS Secrets Manager Credentials Provider and all of the contents. The documentation here is very good. But there's some setup that we have to do within AWS before we can actually do our integration with AWS Secrets Manager. We're going to need to set up an IAM policy, and then we'll attach this IAM policy to a user, and that user will then have a key and secret that we will use to bind to our Jenkins controller. Now, I've already done some of this work for us. If you're not familiar with AWS, just follow along, and then you might have to ask some friends to help you through some of these parts if you're not familiar with how this works. So if we go take a look inside of our IAM management console, what I've done is I have created a policy that has the allow for Secrets Manager get secret value and allow for Secrets Manager list secrets, which are documented here as required permissions. I've also gone ahead and included the optional permission for KMS decrypt within my policy as well. And now what we can do is go take a look at the user that I have set up that has this policy associated with it. So if we take a look at the permission is attached directly to our Jenkins AWS Secrets Manager Credentials Provider plugin. That was the name of the policy that I created over here, which you can see is Jenkins AWS Secrets Manager Credentials Provider plugin. Very long-winded, I know. Go with me here. It helps me remember what I'm doing. So we attached this policy to our user that we're going to be binding our controller with back to here. So when we create a credential for this user, the only permissions this user has is, going back to our policy, we can get secret values from Secrets Manager, and we can list secrets, and also optionally decrypt in case we're using any kind of KMS for our encryption and decryption. So that's the basics for the setup within AWS. Now, we haven't created that credential yet. We'll do that in just a second. Let's go back over to our controller and take a look at what credentials look like here. So we'll go to Manage Jenkins and Manage Credentials. And you may see something a little different here. Now what you see, instead of just seeing a Jenkins with the Jenkins Credentials Provider, you now see a Jenkins that has the AWS credentials provider. So if we were to click into there, we can see that this domain is currently empty. But we can see in the path, credentials, AWS Secrets Manager, global credentials. So our credentials now show not only the Jenkins credentials provider binding, which is right here, which is the Jenkins credentials provider, but we also see the AWS credentials provider. This will become more interesting in just a few moments. So let's go back over to our IAM console and let's create a security credential for this user. So I'm going to create an access key. I'm going to copy my access key ID. And if you see this in the future, just know that this key and secret are already gone. So they're not going to be useful for you at all here. So we have our key and we have our secret. Make sure I have those copied correctly. I do. So let's go ahead and close this because otherwise I don't have access to that secret. Now that we have our key and secret attached to an IAM user that has a policy attached to it of the AWS Secrets Manager credentials, which has the policy of allowing get secret value and list secrets. Now what do we do with it? If you go into the actual GitHub repository for that plugin, what you're going to find is a docs directory that talks about authentication. And what we have to do is we have to configure the plugin to authenticate with AWS. It authenticates with a single primary AWS account, and then you authorize it with IAM to access Secrets Manager in one or more accounts. Now, in my scenario, it's very straightforward. I have my single account, which is what we set up here for our Jenkins Secrets Manager account. And it now has access to my full account and pulling things from Secrets Manager. But let's now take a look at what the methods are that we can use. Now, first off, EC2 instance profiles and EC2 container service credentials. Now, in my scenario, I am running my Jenkins controller locally on a machine within my network. And in fact, it's a Vagrant box that's running on my laptop. So I am not running inside of AWS at all. But if I were running inside of AWS, I would probably use an instance profile as the way to authenticate. So let's step back. We can also use environment variables, Java properties, a user profile, and web identity token credentials. But let's think about it here from a recommendation standpoint. Use EC2 instance profiles when running Jenkins on EC2. That makes a lot of sense. Only use long-lived access key methods, environment variables, Java properties, and user profile when there is no other choice. And this is my example when Jenkins is outside of AWS. Now, for our example today, I am going to be updating my sysconfig file because I'm running on CentOS to include Java properties. Now, you might be saying, okay, Darren, that's probably not a great idea because you're going to be storing your secret key in clear text. Yes, I understand that. That is a known risk for me right now. Would I probably instead use environment variables and load those in a different way? Yes, probably. But for simplicity for today, I'm going to be adding Java properties to my sysconfig file in order to do the startup with my now newly created credentials. So let's go into our controller and make the changes to my sysconfig file. So I'm going to say sudo vi etc sysconfig Jenkins. And let's go down to my Java options, which is near the top. Here we go, Jenkins Java options. I'm going to go to the end of the line. And let's add in my values. First off, I'm adding in a -d for my access key ID. And that value is this. I'm adding in a secret key that is this. And also, one thing that's not documented on that documentation is I need to include a region. So let's include my region of US East 1. Now we can close that up. So in this case, I've added 3 new parameters to my sysconfig file. I've added an aws.accesskeyID with the value, an aws.secretkey with the value, and then an aws.region that's equal to US-east-1. Let's go ahead and save this. Whoops. Let's save this, and then let's stop it. So we're going to stop Jenkins. Just because I can. Let's grep Jenkins, and it's down, and now let's go ahead and start it back up. And just to verify that, I'm going to say sudo systemctl -l status, -l, not equals L, -l status Jenkins. We can see here in the startup process, we have our access key ID, and we have our secret key, and we have our region. So all the values that I just added are showing up in the startup of our controller. So now that we've restarted our Jenkins controller with authentication, we should be binding against our AWS Secrets Manager service. And we can sort of verify that. Let's see what we have here under our Secrets Manager. Right now we have no secrets listed at all, so we have not created any secrets yet. So let's go and create a new secret, but we're going to create it from the command line. I have another credential that I have set up locally on my machine to create credentials within the US East 1 region. So let's go back over to a shell that I have here that's ready to go. There we go. And let's copy in a command to create a secret. And this secret that we are creating is going to be used to connect from our controller to our agent. Normally, I would use a Jenkins native username and password credential to connect to my agent. But today I'm going to use a Secrets Manager credential to connect from my controller to my agent. So let me go ahead and paste in the command that we're going to run, and let's talk about it here for a second. So I'm saying AWS Secrets Manager create secret. So number one, I've already set up my AWS CLI on my machine. The credentials that I'm using when I run AWS have permission to create secrets in Secret Manager. So all of that's been done. If you haven't done that before yourself, I'll leave that for you as homework. I'm creating a secret with the name of sm-vagrant. The secret string is going to be vagrant. And then tags. And you may be asking, okay, why tags and why description? Well, you'll understand description and name in a few moments. But the tags are something special for this plugin. So let's go back over to our documentation and scroll down a little bit more. If we go down under Credentials Provider, you're going to see a secret text. We're going to come back to that one. But let's go take a look at username and password. What this does is it's going to create a secret. The value is going to be the password. So that's going to be the value inside of the secret. But then within the tag, we're going to be creating a username and give it a value of whatever our value is, which in our case is going to be vagrant. So we give it a type of username password. That will map back to, for usage within Jenkins, a username password type credential. And we're storing the actual value of our username in the tag. And the actual value for the secret or the password is stored within value. So let's go back over to our shell here real quick and recap that. So we have a name and a description of sm-vagrant. We have our secret string being vagrant, so that's going to be the secret, that's the password. And then we have two tags. We have a type that is username password, and we have a username that is a value of vagrant as well. So the username value is going to be vagrant, and the username password value is vagrant. So many passwords, so many values. Let's do enter and see what happens. This can take just a few seconds. So give it 5-10 seconds for it to go and create that credential for you. If it is successful, you'll receive back an answer that has the name of sm-vagrant. And then for my case, I can just hit the Q key and that will close that out. To verify this within the UI, let's go back over to Secrets Manager and refresh this page. And we can see here that sm-vagrant now exists. We see the secret name is sm-vagrant, the description is sm-vagrant. Let's click into it. We can see here our tags type is username password, username is vagrant, and the secret value, when I retrieve it, is in plain text, vagrant. So I'm going to have a username password type credential with a username of Vagrant and a password of Vagrant. Now let's go back over to our controller and use this secret that we just created to connect from our controller to our agent. So let's go back here to credentials. But before we start clicking on that, let's refresh our credentials page and see what happens. Oh yeah, I forgot to log in. Let's log in again. So now let's take a look at credentials as this loads back up. And we can see here, we haven't done anything. But because we have set up our controller to authenticate with AWS Secrets Manager, actually we're authenticating with AWS, but it has the policies applied to it that we can actually access our Secrets Manager. We see our SM Vagrant ID that we just created automatically show up within our controller. In fact, if I click through to SM Vagrant, we can see here that SM Vagrant is the ID and the description. Remember, we gave it a name of SM Vagrant, we gave it a description of SM Vagrant. So those values are here. So if you want a nicer human readable description, you can do that within your description here, and you can give it a much longer name. But most of the time, I prefer to create an ID and description being the same. You don't have to. That's my preference. Okay, so since we know that SM Vagrant exists on our controller right now, let's go down to build executor status, and we're going to enter new node. I'm going to type agent 1. For my remote root directory, I'm going to say home vagrant agent. My label is Linux. I'm going to change my launch method to SSH. The host is agent 1. And note the credential, SM Vagrant. So it sees this as a valid credential that can be used to connect to our agent from the controller. Non-verifying strategy. Let's click on Save. As this is launching, we'll watch the log. Scroll up here just a little bit because we can already see it's connected. We can see it's opening a connection to agent 1. Gives us a warning because we're not verifying. And then we see authentication successful. So the credential that we created, the secret that we created within Secrets Manager, is being used as a username password so we can actually make our connection from our controller to our agent. So if we take a look now at nodes, we see that our agent is now online. Before we finish today, I want to walk you through an example of how to create a secret text type credential and then use it within a pipeline. And we'll see how it reacts when we send data using that value. So let's go ahead and go back over to our shell again, and let's paste in a create secret command so we can see how this one works. So we're giving it a name of sm-mysecrettext. The secret string is ABC123, and the tag is a type of value string. Now, where did this come from? If you go back to the documentation for the plugin and you scroll back up to the top for secret text, the value is the secret that we're putting in. In our case, it's ABC123. And we have to only provide it a single tag, type equals string. Remember, we had a variation of that with username and password, except here we had to provide 2 tags. And if you were to continue scrolling down, if you were going to do SSH user private key, there's also 2 tags here. Again, all of these types of credentials that are supported are listed in the documentation. So let's go back to our shell and let's create this secret text. Again, this can take a couple of seconds. This one was pretty fast. We can see it was created. I'm going to hit Q. Let's go back over to our controller, go to Dashboard, Manage Jenkins. Let's verify before we go there. Let's go to Secrets Manager here, click on Secrets. We see our sm-mysecrettext. Just because, let's go ahead and take a look at the secret value. We can see the type here for string. The secret value is ABC123. Now let's go back over to our controller. Let's verify what we see here in credentials. We don't see the MySecretText yet, so let's see what happens here. Let's go there. That could be a caching issue. Let's see, manage credentials. Okay, so it's not visibly showing up here yet, but let's see what happens when I actually go ahead and create my pipeline using that credential. So we'll click on Dashboard. And then we'll click on New Item. And we'll give this a name of Test Job and Pipeline and click OK. Now I have a pipeline I've already created. We'll paste it in. So we have pipeline agent label Linux. We just saw how we created our agent just a few moments ago. I'm setting up a credentials helper in the environment block, SM mySecretText. It's being loaded into mySecret. And then what's going to happen is we're going to curl an X custom header with mySecret. We're going to pass that in. Let's go ahead and click on Save and click on Build Now. We'll watch this log. We can see it matches, it's masking out supported pattern matches, so it's using the standard credentials masking. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? That's not going to work. I gave it the wrong IP address. Let's modify that job. Configure. That would sit there and time out. So let's go over here, change my IP address of where that service is running, which is on my local machine. And now let's do a build now. Okay, so now that we did that, let's take a look at it. We see our X custom header of masked out because we're masking out mySecret. So now let's go over to our shell to where we can see this running. And that is not in that window, it is in this window. So this is the echo service that I'm running against. And if we take a look at our X custom header, we can see that it's ABC123. If we go back into our console one more time and take a look at Manage Jenkins, Manage Credentials, now we can see that the SM mySecretText is now being rendered within the Credentials UI. So why would you want to use something like AWS Secrets Manager instead of the native Jenkins credential types? First, using something like AWS Secrets Manager gives you the ability, out of the box, to apply a rotation policy for your secrets. Secondly, you can use Secrets Manager to secure and audit all of your secrets in a central location. And finally, we led with this as we started this video. In the case to where you're managing numerous Jenkins controllers that need to use the exact same, or maybe a subset of the same credentials across all of your controllers, by having a central location that all of your Jenkins controllers can point at to pull in those credentials, that will greatly simplify your setup and maintenance processes for credentials across your Jenkins controllers. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter at CloudBeesDevs. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on that subscribe button, and then ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there's new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.